The long-haul carrier, ISV Karath Reach, ran the Vareth corridor on a 13-year cycle, and I joined her crew in the third year of her 9th cycle, which meant when I came aboard, she still had 10 years to run before the ground beneath my boots would be ground again. I was 40 when I signed the contract. Thermal Systems mid-rank second rotation. The recruiter at the embarkation port read out the corridor terms twice and asked me if I understood that 10 years meant 10 years. I said I did. He stamped the contract and slid it back across the desk and told me to be at berth 12 by the next watch. He did not ask me why a man my age was signing on to a corridor run when most people did them young and only once. He had probably seen enough of us to know not to ask. The Karath Reach was an old ship. Her hull was patched in 9 places where micrometeoroids had taken bites out of her in earlier cycles, and her internal climate ran cold to save power for the corridor's long jumps. The crew lived in a series of stacked compartments wrapped around the central core, with mid-rank technicians like me in the second ring out from the core, and the higher-rank navigation and command crew further in where it was warmer. The aft hold, where the recycling and the bulk maintenance lived, was the coldest part of the vessel. The aft hold was where the unclaimed lived. I learned about the unclaimed in my second week aboard. I had been pulled to the aft hold for a thermal regulation panel that was reading wrong, and I was kneeling in the recycling junction with my diagnostic kit open when I noticed a small figure at the far end of the corridor, sorting through a bin of separated waste. She was wearing a transit-issue coverall that was at least one size too large for her, and her hands, the parts of them I could see at the cuffs, were gray-violet. She did not look up when I came in. She did not look up when I unpacked the kit. She did not look up at all. She worked through the bin the way you work through something you have been working through for years. When I was done with the panel, I closed the kit and walked back the way I had come. And as I passed her, I said hello. I said it quietly because the aft hold's air was thin enough that voices carried. She did not answer. She did not look up. In the mid-ring service galley afterward, Oakes Darrell, who had been on the Karath Reach for 2 cycles by then, asked me what I had done in the aft hold. I told him about the panel and about the small figure. He nodded the way you nod when someone has told you something you already know. That's Wren, he said. She's an unclaimed. Unclaimed. Doc found. 6 years old, give or take, when she was registered to this vessel. Carrier picked her up at Embarkation 6 on the 3rd moon of Sorath under a relinquished minor provision. No home world of record. No genetic match in any of the registries. She got a transit number and a berth, and she's been on the Karath Reach ever since. How long is that? 9 years next month. I did the arithmetic. The math gave me an age I did not want to assign to her until I had looked at her properly. Oakes saw me do the arithmetic. She is young, he said, but not as young as you would think on a quick look. She is small because she has been on a corridor ration since she was a child. They eat what we eat, but they get the volume calculated for someone we are not feeding the same volume to. She is 24. All right. He set down his cup. Don't get attached. I just learned her name an hour ago. I am saying it now because it is easier to say now than later. The unclaimed cases on a corridor run get processed out at the terminus. There is a protocol. Long-term holding. You do not want to know what long-term holding looks like for a case nobody on a home world has ever filed a name for. So, don't get attached. I told him I would not, and I went back to my own work. And for a few weeks I did not think very much about the small figure in the aft hold. But the Karath Reach is a closed system. You see the same people every shift. You see the same corridors and the same paneled walls and the same recycled air. And after a while you start noticing things you did not set out to notice. I started noticing that Wren worked the same junction every shift. I started noticing that she ate alone in the aft mess at hours when nobody else was there. I started noticing that the gloves she wore had worn through at the fingertips, and that her hands at the cuffs were always slightly gray-blue from the cold, and that nobody had given her replacement gloves, although the maintenance manifest line for personal protective equipment ran in a steady automatic order to every crew berth twice a cycle. The 3rd month aboard, I was checking the thermal regulation in the aft hold, and I happened to be carrying a spare pair of thermal gloves for my own kit. They were the medium size. I had ordered them as a backup. I did not need them. On my way past the recycling junction, I set them on the lid of the bin nearest to where she worked, and I did not stop and did not say anything, and I went on to the panel and did the diagnostic. When I came back through, the gloves were gone. She did not look up. The next morning, when I went to my locker before my shift, The gloves were sitting on the shelf at the top of the locker. They had been washed and dried and folded. The cuffs had been mended at the inner seam where they had been fraying. The work was not visible from the outside. You would only see it if you turned the cuff inside out. I did not turn them inside out for 2 days. I did not know what to do with what I had found. Then I put them in my kit and went back to the aft hold, and the next time I had a panel to check there, I set down a thermos of stew on the bench beside the recycling bin. The galley had let me take it because I had told them I would not eat the lunch, and would they please put my portion into a thermos. The galley had asked no questions. "Made too much," I said. "It'll just go to waste." I did not look at her when I said it. I went to the panel. When I came back, the thermos was still on the bench. She had not taken it. I felt foolish, and I picked it up and went on with my work. The next morning, the thermos was in my locker, washed and dried, with a folded square of dark gray thermal cloth set on top of it. The cloth was about the size of a hand towel. It was clean and pressed. The cloth was the kind they use in the recycling junction to wipe down sorting surfaces, which meant it had cost her nothing. But the pressing was new. The pressing took an iron, and the iron she had used was the iron crew technicians used in their berths, which meant she had stood in someone's berth or in a maintenance bay long enough to press it. Wren had given me something. She had given me something the only way she could give anything, which was with materials at hand and labor she would not be charged for. I started planning my rotation around the aft hold. I did not tell anyone I was doing it. I just started taking the aft shifts that nobody else wanted, the night cycles, the early dawn cycles, the shifts when the temperature dropped lowest, because the central core was running cooler to save power before a corridor jump. I worked beside her 2 corridors over, sometimes the same corridor. I learned the shape of her routine. I learned that she did not stop for the meal break the way the rest of us did, because the aft mess closed during the meal break, and she had no other place to be. So she worked through and ate off hours. The thermos came regularly. I would set it on the bench. Sometimes she took it the same day. Sometimes she did not, and I picked it up and brought it back the next day. The thermos came back washed and dried with a small additional thing. Once a folded transit ration bar that I had not given her, taken from her own allotment. Once a sliver of soap shaped like a fingernail that smelled like nothing I could place. Once a polished river stone that I could not figure out how she had come into possession of on a vessel that had not seen a river in 9 years. I put the river stone on the top shelf of my locker and did not ask. It was 4 months in before she spoke. I was kneeling at the thermal regulator panel, and the diagnostic was running, and she was sorting at the bin, and she said very quietly, "The panel runs hot at the 3rd subjunction." I did not look up. I let her keep her own pace. "I see that. I am rerouting the load. It should settle in a watch." She did not say anything more. But the next time I came to the junction, she said again very quietly, "The compressor on the recycler is running rough. I'll get to it tomorrow." That was the entire conversation. But she had spoken twice. I marked it the way you mark a calendar. Oakes noticed. Oakes noticed in the way that men who have been on a vessel for 2 cycles notice everything. He found me in the secondary mess and sat down across from me with his cup. "Renner, Oakes, you are going to make this worse." "I am not making anything worse. I am working aft shifts because nobody else wants them, and the rotation gives me a 1/4 credit bump." "Renner, Oakes." He drank his cup down and set it on the table. 5 years and 8 months, he said. "That is how long until terminus from now." "I can count." "Then count and think about what you are doing, and think about what happens when the corridor ends." I told him I would. I did not. What I did instead was begin to read the corridor operations manual. I had been issued a copy when I came aboard, and I had read the technical sections that pertained to my work, but I had not read the administrative sections. I read them now. I read them at night in my bunk with a small light on, working through dense paragraphs of procedural language that had been written by someone who had cared more about being unimpeachable than about being clear. I read the chapter on the disposition of unclaimed cases at Terminus, and what I read was what Oakes had told me in language designed to be looked away from. I read the chapter on personnel administration. In the 83rd subsection of that chapter, under the heading Discretionary Procedures, there was a provision I had not known existed. The corridor personnel sponsorship filing. A vessel crew member of mid-rank or above with a clean disciplinary record and a domiciled address at Terminus could file a formal sponsorship for an unclaimed case prior to disposition. The filing required substantial documentation, proof of housing of sufficient size, proof of income sufficient to support an additional registered person, for a probationary period of 1 standard year. Evidence of a domestic arrangement compatible with the sponsored person's reasonable needs, and a coordinator's review at 3 intervals during the corridor's final phase. If the filing cleared all 3 reviews, the sponsored person's disposition at terminus was voided, and the case was transferred to the sponsor's domestic record. The sponsored person became a registered resident of the sponsor's homeworld under the terms of the sponsor's existing citizenship. I read the provision 4 times. I did not have a homeworld in the strict sense. I had been born on the 3rd moon of Delvarn, but I had not lived there since I was a young man. I had a domiciled address at terminus, however, because before I had signed the corridor contract, I had owned a small unit at Drayden Point, on the 2nd continent of the world the Verith corridor ended at. I had owned the unit for 16 years. I had bought it after my wife died when I had needed somewhere to be that was not the apartment we had shared, and I had kept it and rented it out to a series of tenants because selling it had felt like a thing I would have to do eventually, but had not yet been ready to do. The unit was 2 rooms and a kitchen, and a small balcony that looked out over a side street. The unit was sufficient housing for 1 additional registered person. I did not say this to Oakes. I did not say it to anyone. I started making notes in a small folder at the back of my locker. I noted what documentation I would need. I noted what the coordinator's review would likely scrutinize. I noted the income calculations. And I noted that my crew salary plus the corridor completion bonus would clear the threshold by a comfortable margin. I noted that I would need a letter from the property management at Drayden Point confirming the unit was being held vacant for my return, which it would not be unless I sent instructions to end the current tenant's lease before terminus. The current tenant was on a year-to-year. The notice period was 90 days. I would need to send the notice from the vessel's mid-cycle correspondence packet, which went out twice a quarter. I sent the notice in the next packet. I did not tell Wren anything. I was not certain I would file. I was certain I would learn what filing required, and I was certain I would put the pieces of it in place where they could be in place, and I was certain that the deciding was a thing I would do later. That was what I told myself in the 5th month aboard, and in the 6th, and in the 7th. I told it to myself in the dark of my bunk at the end of long shifts, and I told it to myself standing in the secondary shower with the warm water on my shoulders. And I told it to myself in the aft hold when the diagnostic was running, and Wren was sorting at the bin, and the silence between us was no longer the silence of strangers. In the 7th month, she said my name. I had not given it to her, but the crew manifest is not classified, and she had clearly looked. "Renner," she said very quietly when I was kneeling at the panel. "The fan housing has a small crack at the upper bracket. It is going to fail." "I'll look at it." "All right." She did not answer, but she did not move away. "The thermos is on the bench." "I know. It will be cold by the 3rd watch if you do not take it now." She left the bin and came over to the bench and took the thermos and went back to the bin. She did not look at me, but she held the thermos against her chest with both hands for a moment before she set it down beside her work, and I understood, watching her hold it, that she had been very cold for a very long time, and that the warmth of a thermos against her ribs was the kind of thing a person who had been very cold for a very long time would hold for a moment before setting down. I did not say anything. I went back to the panel. The corridor was 4 years and 3 months from terminus by then. The internal time of the vessel ran on the Verith corridor's local cycle, and the cycle was longer than a standard day, so the way time felt aboard was not the way time would feel anywhere else. But the calendar at the central core read the same calendar everyone read, and 4 years and 3 months was 4 years and 3 months. I started spending more time in the aft hold. I requested formal rotation changes through the technical supervisor, who looked at me over the top of his console and asked me what I was doing. I told him the aft thermal grid was undermanaged, and I wanted to get it onto a regular maintenance schedule that did not depend on someone noticing a problem and calling it in. He looked at me for a long moment, and then approved the rotation change without comment. I thought he might have understood. I did not ask. In the 2nd year of my time aboard, I patched the strut on Wren's cot. She slept in a maintenance alcove off the aft junction. It was not technically a berth. It was a converted storage space that had been allocated to her as part of her registry. The cot was a folding transit-issue cot, and one of its struts had been bent at the joint for as long as anyone could remember. I came in one day when she was on shift, and I had a length of brace stock and a clamp, and I patched the strut. It took me 40 minutes. I did not leave a note. I did not need to. The next morning when I went to my locker, there was a small piece of folded paper inside my left boot. It said only, "Thank you." I kept the paper. I kept it for years. In the third year, I brought her a real blanket. The blanket was from my own kit. It was a thermal wrap I had bought before I signed the contract, soft and dense in the color of dried bay leaves. I had brought 2 of them and only used one. I folded the spare and set it on her cot one evening when I knew she would not be back for 2 watches. I did not write a note. I did not need to. She used it from that night on. I knew because I came through the aft junction one cold cycle in the 3rd watch, and I saw her sleeping under it through the open doorway of the alcove. Her face was turned away. The blanket was tucked under her chin. She looked in that moment like a small, gray-violet child sleeping under a blanket the color of dried bay leaves on a folding cot in a converted storage space on a long-haul vessel 4 years from a port she had never been to. I did not stop. I went onto the panel. She started talking more after that. Not much. Wren never talked much, but she would say small things, work things, sometimes a small personal thing. She told me one cycle that she had no memory of the world she had been dock found on. She had been 6. She remembered a corridor. She remembered a man in a blue uniform who had told her to wait, and she had waited, and he had not come back. She remembered being taken aboard and being given a number and a coverall. "Do you remember anything before the corridor?" I said. "I remember a window. A window. A window that opened on the inside, not the outside. The window was on the inside of something. I do not know what." "All right. I do not think it matters anymore. It matters if it matters to you. That is the only way it matters." She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "I do not know what to do with it mattering." "You do not have to do anything with it. You can just have it." "All right." That was a long conversation for Wren. She was quiet for 2 shifts after. The 4th year I started the documentation. I did not tell her. I started gathering what I needed. The property management letter came back from Drayton Point confirming the unit was vacant and being held for my return. The income certification came from the vessel's payroll office without comment, although the payroll clerk did look at me when I asked for the certified copies and did not ask what I needed them for. I filled out the corridor personnel sponsorship filing form in pencil first on a separate sheet and copied it in ink only when I was certain of every line. The form was 27 pages long. I worked on it in my bunk at night for several months. I did not tell Wren. I did not tell Oakes. I did not tell anyone. In the 5th year, Briggs from the galley sat down across from me in the secondary mess and pushed her cup against mine. "Renner." "Briggs, you know what happens at Terminus." "I know." "All right." She did not say anything else. She finished her cup and stood up and went on with her shift. I understood that she had said what she said because she wanted me to know that someone else in the crew knew, and that she was not going to say anything about it, and that I should know I was not the only one who had noticed what was happening in the aft hold over 5 years. I appreciated it. I did not thank her. We did not talk about it again. The corridor approached Terminus. There is a thing that happens on a long-haul vessel in the last year of a cycle. The crew begins slowly to remember that there is a world outside the vessel. They begin to talk about it again. They begin to think about what they will do when they step off the ramp. They begin to make small lists in their bunks, the names of foods they want to eat first, and the places they want to walk, and the people they want to find. The vessel's mood shifts. The shifts are quieter. The mess is louder. The unclaimed cases, there were 11 of them aboard the Careth Reach, scattered through the aft compartments, become more visible by the slow withdrawal of the crew who do not want to be reminded in this last year of what will happen to 11 of them. I filed the sponsorship paperwork at 6 months out. The filing went to Coordinator Solon, who handled all personnel administration for the Careth Reach. She was a veteran administrator, 30-some standard years in corridor service, severe in manner and not unkind. She called me into her office 2 weeks after the filing. Her office was small. There was a desk with a console and 2 chairs. The wall behind the desk had a calendar on it showing the corridor's remaining months. The desk had a pen cup with 3 pens in it, all of them the same kind of pen. Technician Voss. Coordinator, I have your filing. It is in order. Thank you. It is in order in that you have filled in every field correctly and provided every document the protocol requires. I want to be clear that this is the first time I have processed a corridor personnel sponsorship filing in 11 years aboard this vessel. I understand. The reason it is unusual is not that the provision is obscure. The reason it is unusual is that it is difficult to complete in good faith, and very few crew members make it to terminus still wanting to complete it. The provision was written to allow for genuine cases. It was not written to allow for moments of pity in the second month of a cycle, which the sponsor then has to live with for 10 years. I have been aboard 3 years. I have known the sponsored person for 2.5. I see that. I am noting it. I am also noting that you have a unit at Drayden Point that you have held vacant for the last 14 months, which means you began the process of preparing for this filing well before you filed it. That is correct. Why? I had thought she might ask this. I had thought about how I would answer it. I had not been able to think of a way to answer it that would be easier than the true answer, so I had decided I would simply give the true answer. Because the protocol that disposes of her case at terminus is not a protocol I am willing to allow to dispose of her case at terminus. That is not your decision to make about another adult person. No. That is why the filing is also a request that I be given the opportunity to ask her, which I have not done, and which I will not do until the filing is provisionally cleared, because I do not want to ask her until I am certain I can offer what I am asking her to consider. Coordinator Solon looked at me for a long time. She did not blink in the way species that do not have the same kind of eyelid we have do not blink. Her eyes were the color of polished slate. You have not told her? No. Why? Because if the filing fails, I will not have promised her something I cannot give. Technician Voss. Coordinator. That is the correct answer. She marked something on her console. There are 3 review intervals. The first is now. The first is satisfied. The second will be at 3 months out. The third will be at 3 weeks out. At the third interval, if the filing is still in good order, the disposition will be provisionally voided pending the sponsored person's acceptance. The sponsored person has the right to decline. You understand this? Yes. If she declines, the disposition reverts to the standard protocol. There is no second filing. I understand. All right, go back to your shift. I went back to my shift. The next 3 months were the slowest 3 months of my life. I did not change my behavior toward Ren. I did not tell her. I brought the thermos. I sat with her in the aft mess at off hours, sometimes eating my own meal in silence beside her silence. I patched 2 more things in the alcove, a hinge on the door, a worn place on the cot's webbing. I did not make her any promise. I did not give her any sign. I had decided that whatever she felt about the choice she would have to make, she would have to come to it without my having put a thumb on the scale before she was asked. The second review interval came. The filing was still in good order. Coordinator Solon did not call me in. She sent a single line through the internal correspondence system, provisionally retained at interval 2. The third interval was 3 weeks out. In the weeks between the second interval and the third, the processing schedule for unclaimed cases was posted in the aft hold. It was a standard posting. It went up every cycle. The schedule listed the 11 unclaimed by their transit numbers and their assigned disposition. Ren's transit number was TRS-5RC-09-0114. The disposition column read long-term holding Kestrel Annex intake D+3. I saw her see the schedule. She was at the bin. She walked past the posting board on her way to the recycling chute. She slowed for 2 steps. She did not stop. She did not look back. She went on to the chute and emptied her container and went back to the bin and did not look at the posting again. I did not say anything. I did not say anything for 2 more days. In the third evening, when my shift ended, and the aft hold was quiet, and the third watch lights were on the low cycle, I came to the alcove. The blanket was on the cot. Ren was sitting on the edge of the cot. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was looking at her hands. The light in the alcove was dim and warm because she had angled the small task lamp toward the wall. I stood in the doorway. I did not come in. Ren, I know you saw the posting. Yes. All right. She did not look up. I always knew the day would come, she said. I have known the day would come for a long time. I have known the day would come since I was 8, and someone explained the disposition column to me. I am not surprised. I am not asking you to be sad about it. I am only asking you not to come tonight. Ren. Please, Renner. Ren, I came to tell you something. She looked up. Her eyes were the color of pale jade in the warm light. Her face was very still. She had been crying earlier, I could tell, but the crying had been finished some time ago, and her face was composed now, in the way that a face becomes composed when the crying has been done in private, and the person who has done the crying is now in the part of the day where she is sitting with what she had cried about. I filed a corridor personnel sponsorship filing 6 months ago, I said. Coordinator Solon has been reviewing it through 3 intervals. The second interval cleared. The third interval is next week. If the third interval clears, the disposition column on the posting will be voided. You would not go to long-term holding. You would come with me to Drayden Point. I have a unit there, 2 rooms and a kitchen. There is a balcony. The balcony looks out on a side street. You would be a registered resident of my citizenship. After a year of probationary period, you would be eligible for your own independent registration. After that, you could stay, or you could go. I am not asking you to decide that tonight. I am telling you what the filing says. I am telling you because Coordinator Solon said I could ask you when the second interval cleared, and the second interval cleared 3 months ago, and I have been waiting because I did not want to ask you until the third was close enough to be real, and the third is close enough now. She did not move. I had thought in the months I had been waiting to say this to her that she might cry, or that she might be angry, or that she might be confused, or that she might smile. She did not do any of those things. She sat very still on the edge of the cot, with her hands folded in her lap, and she looked at me across the dim, warm light of the alcove, and her hands began to tremble. The trembling started in her fingers and moved into her wrists, and the wrists began to shake hard enough that she put one hand over the other and held them down in her lap to make them stop. She was looking at me the entire time. Her eyes did not leave my face. "Human," she said. "Ren, human, are you really going to stay with me?" She said it in the voice of a person who has not asked a question of that kind in 9 years, because there has been no one to ask. She said it in the voice of a person who has been alone for the length of a childhood and a young adulthood, and has learned how to be alone so completely that the asking of the question came out small and clear and honest in a way that asking does not usually come out for people who have been practicing not asking. She said human because she did not have another word for me. She had my name. She had used my name. But the word she needed in the question was a word that meant person who stays, and she did not have it, and human was the closest word she had. "Yes," I said, "yes." "You are sure?" "I am sure. The filing has been in process for 6 months. The unit at Drayden Point has been held vacant for 14. I would not have begun any of this if I had not been sure. I am asking you in turn whether you want to come. You can say no. The disposition reverts to the protocol if you say no. That is your choice. I want you to know that it is your choice. But you asked me, and I am answering you. Yes. I am going to stay with you if you say yes." Her hands stopped trembling. She kept them folded. She looked at me steadily. The light in the alcove was very warm and very dim, and the third watch lights in the corridor outside the doorway made a soft, pale line on the floor between us. "I have a thing I want to say," she said. "All right. I want to say it because I have been carrying it for a long time, and I do not want to carry it past tonight. I want to say it, and then I want you to come into the alcove and sit on the cot beside me because the alcove is very small, and I would like to be sitting beside someone tonight after you have said what you have said." "All right. I have been in love with you for 2 years. I did not know what to do with it. I thought it was a thing I would carry to Terminus, and then it would go to long-term holding with the rest of me. I am telling you now, because you have asked me to come with you to a unit with a balcony, and I cannot come with you to a unit with a balcony without you knowing first. If you knowing first changes anything, you can tell me, and I will understand." I did not say anything for a moment. I had thought in the months of the filing about what I would do if she said yes. I had thought about how I would arrange the unit. I had thought about what she would need that I had not thought of. I had not thought about this because I had not let myself think about this because I had decided long ago that whatever I felt about her was a thing that did not have a place in the filing. And whatever she felt about me, if she felt anything at all, was a thing I did not have the right to ask about until she was safely off this vessel and standing on her own ground. She was telling me she had decided to tell me. She had decided that she could not come to the unit without my knowing. "It does not change anything," I said, "except that I am very glad you told me." "All right. Ren, yes. It is not a thing I would have asked not until later, not until you were registered and safe, and you had a year of being your own person at the unit. I had decided I would not ask. I thought it would not be fair to ask." "I know." "You knew. I knew because you patched the strut on the cot in the second year and you did not leave a note. You knew I would know it was you. You did not leave a note because you did not want me to feel I owed you anything. I knew then. I have known for a long time. I am only telling you tonight because I am about to leave a vessel I have been on for 9 years, and I am about to live in a unit with a balcony, and I cannot enter the unit with anything unsaid. I came into the alcove. I sat down on the cot beside her. The cot creaked under the weight of 2 people instead of 1, the way a folding transit issue cot creaks. Her shoulder was against my upper arm. She was very small beside me. The blanket the color of dried bay leaves was folded at the foot of the cot. The small task lamp pointed at the wall and the warm light pooled on the floor. We did not say anything for a long time. After a while, she leaned her head against my shoulder. Her hair was dark and cropped short, and smelled like the soap she had been given by the vessel's allotment, which was a soap with no scent that I had been able to identify. The soap smelled in that moment like Wren. I did not put my arm around her because I had decided long ago that I would not do anything she had not asked me to do, and she had asked me to sit beside her, not to put my arm around her. She leaned. That was what she had asked for. I sat. After a long time she said, Wren, I will come with you to Drayden Point. All right. Will you bring the Riverstone? Yes. All right. We sat like that until the 4th watch came on, and the alcove lamp clicked over to its dimmer setting. Then I stood up, and she stood up, and I went back to my own bunk, and I lay awake for a long time looking at the ceiling. The 3rd interval cleared 2 days later. Coordinator Solon sent me a single line. Cleared. Disposition voided. Sponsored person to be advised. I did not need to advise her. She was at the bin the next morning sorting, and when I came into the junction she looked up at me and I nodded, and she nodded back and she went on with her work. The corridor's last 3 weeks went by in the way the last 3 weeks of a corridor go by. The crew packed. The vessel slowed. The internal lighting shifted up a level as the bridge crew prepared the deceleration sequence. The 11 unclaimed cases became 10 when one of them, an older case, a man named Aldrich, who had been on the Karath Reach for 14 years, was found in his alcove having decided not to wait for terminus. The crew was quiet for a day. Then the corridor went on. I did not tell Wren about Aldrich. Wren knew. Wren knew everything that happened in the aft compartments in the way that the unclaimed always know. At terminus, we docked at the second berth of the receiving station at Drayden Point. The disembarkation took 3 days. The crew left in waves by rotation. The unclaimed left in a single group on the second day, escorted to the long-term holding facility annex. Wren was not with them. She walked down the disembarkation ramp beside me at the end of the 3rd day with her transit case under my arm. It was very light. She had almost nothing in it. Her own kit was a small gray-violet bundle in her own hand. She wore the thermal coverall because she had nothing else. I had told her we would buy her ordinary clothes the next day. She had nodded. The ramp ended at the dock floor. The dock floor was steel grating with a coating of dust over it. The kind of dust that collects on dock floors at receiving stations, because the receiving stations open onto the outside. The outside was bright. The Drayden Point receiving station was on the second continent of a small green world that ran a 14-hour standard day. And at the hour of our disembarkation, the sun was about midway down toward the west, and the light coming through the open dock doors was the slanted yellow light of late afternoon, and it fell across the steel grating in long, warm bars. Wren stepped off the ramp. Her boot transit issue worn at the toe came down on the steel grating, and she walked 5 paces. And then she walked off the steel grating onto the unpaved approach beyond the dock where the dock crew had laid down packed dirt with gravel pressed into it for the cargo handlers. She stopped on the dirt. She stood very still. She was looking down at her boots. The dirt was the first ground that was not a vessel deck or a station floor that her feet had stood on in 9 years, and the second time in her life if you counted the first 6 years. She did not remember. She looked at it for a long time. I stopped beside her. I did not say anything. The transit case was under my arm. The yellow light fell across her shoulders and the side of her face, and her gray-violet skin was warmer in the yellow light than it had been under the white light of the aft hold. The way her skin had always been going to be warmer in the sun than it had been under the white light of the aft hold, which I had not known until that moment, because I had not known until that moment what her skin would look like in a sun. She crouched down. She put her hand flat against the dirt. She held it there for a few breaths. Then she stood up. Her hand had a small smudge of pale brown dirt on the palm. She did not wipe it off. She turned her face up toward me. Renner. Ren. All right. All right. We walked off the dock approach together. The unit at Drayton Point was on the third side street up from the receiving station, a 15-minute walk. The balcony of the unit looked out on the side street, and the side street had a low stone wall along one side of it where children sometimes sat in the evenings. And the unit had 2 rooms and a kitchen. And the kitchen had a window that opened on the inside of the building onto a small interior courtyard with a single tree growing in it. And when I unlocked the door and she stepped through, I watched her face when she saw the inside window, and her eyes went to it and stayed there for a long moment. And she did not say anything, and I did not say anything, and we did not need to say anything, because she had remembered the window from her childhood. The window that opened on the inside of something and not the outside. And I had not known that the kitchen in the unit had such a window until I had bought the unit 16 years before, when I had bought it for reasons that had nothing to do with windows. And she had not known that I had a unit with such a window until she walked through the door of it on the 3rd day of the disembarkation. She set her gray-violet bundle down on the kitchen floor. She walked to the inside window. She stood at it. She put one hand flat against the glass. I set the transit case down beside her bundle. I went to stand beside her at the window. The interior courtyard was small and dim, and the single tree in the middle of it had pale green leaves with light coming through them from somewhere above. There was a tree, she said. Yes, there was a tree on the other side of the window. Yes, there was a tree. All right, all right. She stood at the window for a long time. I stood beside her. After a while, she turned away from the window and looked around the kitchen, and her eyes went to the small table and the 2 chairs and the kettle on the stove, and she said, Is there tea? Yes. Can we make tea? Yes. I filled the kettle. I put it on the stove. She sat down at one of the 2 chairs. I set out 2 cups. The cups did not match. I had bought one of them at the embarkation port before I had signed the contract, and I had bought the other one 15 years before that. The cups were both blue. They were different blues, but they were both blue. The kettle came up. I poured the water over the leaves in the small pot. I set the small pot on the table between the 2 cups, and I sat down in the other chair, and we waited for the tea to steep, and Wren sat with her hands folded on the table in front of her, in the late afternoon yellow light coming through the kitchen window from the outside, and the dimmer green light coming through the inside window from the courtyard. And her face in the 2 lights together was the most settled face I had ever seen her wear, and after a while she looked across the table at me, and she did not need to say anything, and I did not need to say anything. And the tea steeped, and I poured it, and we drank it. And it was very good tea, and the unit was very quiet, and outside on the side street a child was running a stick along the low stone wall. And the sound of the stick on the stones came in through the open window in slow, regular taps that we did not need to talk about, and that we sat through together until the child went on past, and the late afternoon yellow light shifted further down toward the west. Wren finished her tea. She set the cup down. She looked at me across the table. Human, she said. Wren, I think I am going to be all right here. All right, I think I'm going to stay. Yes, I refilled her cup. I had spent a great many years on a vessel, and a great many more years before that on a moon that I had left and not gone back to, and a great many years in a unit that I had bought because I had not been able to think of what else to do. And I had not in any of those years expected to find myself across a kitchen table from a small gray-violet woman who had been carried on a long-haul vessel for 9 years, and who had been waiting at the inside window of my kitchen since she was 6 years old, without either of us knowing the other existed. I poured her tea. She drank it. The light came through the window. Outside on the side street somewhere a different child began to count, and another child laughed, and the sound came in through the open window. The way sound comes in through an open window on a small green world, in the late afternoon yellow light. I had stayed. That in the end was the entire thing I had needed to do.